Hey, it's Jason. Before we roll tape, just a quick programming note. We recorded this podcast a few hours before Representative Jared Golden of Maine announced he would not be running for re-election. Instead of junking the podcast and our erudite analysis, we're running it in full. Consider it a lesson in how volatile the political environment can be. Anyway, enjoy the episode. And to Congressman Golden, thanks a lot. Kidding. Everyone makes their own decision and on their own timeline. And away we go.
This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick.
Campaign strategists fear their call. Daniela, Altimari, and Mary Ellen McIntire have just completed our most recent round of the most vulnerable incumbents list here at Roll Call. This is something we do on a periodic basis to identify which members of Congress are the most vulnerable in their upcoming re-election bids. Last time we did this was in May, back in May, and it was interesting because, again, we were at an early stage. It was a very unstable time politically. Things have settled in a little bit, but there's a little bit more instability that we can discuss about, the political world. But right now, I just want to get right into the most vulnerable House and Senate members that Daniela, you and Mel, have compiled, because again, I only it's only right half the time, because it seems like while some campaign strategists are thinking, oh no, don't put my member, don't put my guy, my gal on this list. Others are like, cool, now that I'm on a most vulnerable list for Roll Call, I can raise more money. So let's talk about what's changed and what was going through. Let's start with the House, because actually, let's start with the Senate. Because the Senate won't change because of a massive election in California yesterday. So let's start with the Senate, which is, I think, I hesitate to ever say stable in this world right now. But let's start with the most vulnerable incumbent senators that you've been working on.
Yeah, I think with the Senate list, it keeps shrinking because, we do only look at incumbents, and there are several, one who was right at, I think, number 2 on our list the last time, Senator Tillis from North Carolina, no longer vulnerable because he's not running for re-election. So he's kind of taken himself off the list. So we just look at incumbents. So, and, obviously there are several very key open seats that are going to determine who controls the chamber, and those don't figure into our calculations.
I was just going to say, what's interesting about this list to this year is because there are so many open seats, a number of the folks on the list, Senator Bill Cassidy, Senator John Cornyn, Senator Ed Markey, are there because of primary challenges and their dynamics. Like, realistically, I mean, Texas is Democrats' white whale. Like, it could be competitive in the general election.
Keeps drifting out to sea.
Yeah.
With Ahab attached to it.
Yes. Like, John Cornyn, maybe would be on in, the last spot if he was just running for re-election and there was, a Democratic senator, the Senate primary that's forming in Texas. He is much higher on the list because of his challenges from Ken Paxton, the state attorney general, and Congressman Wesley Hunt. I think Wesley Hunt's entrance into the race since the last time we did this in May, a couple of weeks ago, really changes the dynamics of this race, especially with the runoff system in Texas and just who is he going to draw his voters from. So that was something that you sort of saw some of Cornyn's backers nationally trying to push back on. But he's actually moved up a bit over Bill Cassidy, who, a Republican from Louisiana, who has really tried to emphasize over the last couple of months that he is a strong Trump supporter, team player, but he voted to impeach President Trump after January 6th. So that is really his biggest political vulnerability.
He's the first guy at the White House when Republican senators get an invitation. He's like they're like camping out like a new Star Wars movie is coming out.
His team has pointed out he's been invited to the White House dozens of times. He just
so many
nominated President Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, he is doing everything within his power to get back into the president's good graces because, as it was pointed out, obviously Louisiana, the president's endorsement will play heavily in such a conservative Republican state. So.
Yeah, and there's now a storied tradition of saying that Trump is unfit for office or voting to impeach him, or saying that he has no business being president, and then sucking up to him once you realize that he's actually got a bigger political apparatus that could take you down. Look no further than the vice president of the United States, J.D. Vance, who in before his political career started, and he was just a book author and a venture capitalist, just said all kinds of things about Donald Trump that weren't very nice, and then hat in hand went down to Mar-a-Lago when he was running for Senate, and then got into the good graces with the Trump kids, and now all of a sudden he's vice president of the United States.
And
potentially heir apparent.
Another member of the Trump impeachment club, Senator Collins, perhaps for her, it is not a liability at all. It could actually be, it probably will be a selling point for her in the state of Maine. So
in Maine, yeah. And so not to get too much into, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about Maine politics and the different local elections that happened, but again, there wasn't a lot of positive news for Republicans anywhere on election night, including in Maine, where voters voted down a proposed requirement for showing that would increase the sort of boundaries to voting, like showing photo ID or proof of citizenship, stuff like that. And it seems like Collins is, she has her own brand for sure, but the state didn't seem overly, Republican friendly in last night's election.
This is an interesting test for Susan Collins. I don't know if it's necessarily the first time ever, but at a minimum, the first time in several of her reelection cycles that she is up in a midterm election with her party's president in the White House. It's a different dynamic than she's had for the last couple of times that she's been on the ballot. And she is really driving in this brand. And look, it's a proven brand. She's won reelection in a blue-leaning state 5 times. That doesn't just happen. She's good at this. She knows what she's doing. Right. But it's not a great sign for her, probably. I mean, this race has changed a lot as well. When we did this race last time, she faced one challenger, maybe. I forget exactly when folks started getting into this race last spring. But Janet Mills, the Democratic governor, 2-term governor, pretty popular in the state as well, has entered the race. You've also seen a political newcomer, Graham Plattner, the oyster farmer, who's really drawn a lot of headlines. So they're
tattoos, yes.
Yeah, with his tattoos and Reddit posts. We have not been in Maine, but from all of the coverage I've seen from Maine reporters and our fellow, journalists here in DC who have gone up there, I mean, it seems like he's not necessarily losing a lot of on-the-ground support. It seems like he's still getting, hundreds of people turning out to his rallies a year to go till the election. So, we'll see kind of how that plays out. He's really kind of pushing this on the outsider that the establishment doesn't want. I think this is going to be one of those really key Democratic primaries that we're all watching for. Okay, where are Democratic voters heading into not only 2026 but 2028? Are they with the establishment, Janet Mills, Chuck Schumer, or are they with Graham Plattner, Bernie Sanders, AOC? Sort of how that divides, and we'll see. But I mean, do think that it's usually good for an incumbent when there's a tough primary to come against them. That can get a little nasty. That can hurt them. So they have to spend their resources. They can't just sort of save everything until the general election. So we'll see for Susan Collins. I think our good pal Nathan Gonzalez has her in the Tilt R category. And I think this is going a lot on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
It's like tilt. It's not lean.
It's tilt. We'll see if that changes. Him, us, this is going to be a really tough race for her. Candidly, we are expecting that she's running. She's been acting like she's running. She's raising money. She's not actually formally launched her reelection 6 years ago. That happened in December before the election year. So I would imagine we'll see some more formal movement from her in these next next couple of weeks before the end of the year, but that is just sort of my own speculation.
And everybody's younger than Chuck Grassley, so
Yeah.
age isn't an issue.
And
Maine is an old state too.
Maine is an older state, so that I think is one question of like, do older voters there care about that or not? And
Mills is no spring chicken.
I was going to say she's younger than Janet Mills, so I think that is sort of an interesting dynamic with this age question. If Mills is the nominee, like, I don't necessarily envision Susan Collins going after her. Yeah. I don't envision Susan Collins going after her on age. I would envision other outside Republicans going after her on age. But sort of an interesting dynamic on that issue.
Well, let's before we talk about the House, let's just run through the list. One through, and yeah, we used to make sure that it was 10, and we've had trouble getting to 10 because there just aren't that many open races or non-competitive races.
I think it's one thing that's interesting. Literally, as of last night, one of the races that we were sort of do we put on in order to go to 10 was Kansas, where Roger Marshall, the Republican, is up for re-election. And there's been a lot of speculation that legislators in Kansas could try to redraw their congressional map to try to target Sharice Davids. And she had sort of been pretty open about, if this happens, if my district gets redrawn and re-election is going to be really tough for me, maybe I run for Senate instead. And, that, if that had played out, would have been something that, probably would have brought that onto the list. Last night, legislators in Kansas says they're not pursuing redistricting.
Right. Don't mess with Sharice Davids. She's an former MMA fighter. Like, she beat up Crystal Liz on camera.
Right.
Like, I think I mean, who knows? It's a Republican state, but like, she has her own brand too.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that also, one state we don't have on here before we actually run down the list, like you asked, is Alaska as well. And Mary Peltola, where everyone sort of seems to be waiting on whether or not she wants to run for Senate or governor, and polls have sort of shown that if she runs for Senate, she definitely has a shot, but it's very competitive.
Right, against Dan Sullivan.
Against Dan Sullivan. And if she runs for governor, maybe it's a bit more of a clear path for her. Mm-hmm. We'll see. I don't know. I don't necessarily know that I would want to be flying back and forth every week or so often from Alaska to D.C.
DC doesn't have quite the pull. I mean, I always wonder about this with, like, if you have the choice between retiring or running for governor or doing something like that, why, especially right now, would you choose to be in DC unless you just really love, like, the Smithsonian being shut down on a regular basis?
Yes.
Alaska, DC. Yeah.
Give or take.
Yeah. And then, you're, like you said, 14-hour flights.
Right. Layovers, like there's not really DCA doesn't fly direct to Anchorage.
Right. Go through like Tokyo or something. So. No, I know that's not true.
Not quite there.
Seattle, probably.
Seattle.
Okay, so let's go through the list.
Yeah.
So we have Senator Ossoff on there and Senator Collins, both the top targets for their respective opponents.
1 and 2. Yep.
Yeah.
John Ossoff who again was one of those wins in 2020 that probably gave Democrats a majority.
Exactly.
And Raphael Warnock. Yeah.
Exactly. So. And, he's raised so much money. So that certainly is a check in his favor. Also,
so to speak, a check.
A literal check.
For our younger listeners, that's a piece of paper that you can write on that transfers money to another person.
And, there are 3 Republicans running against him, and they're getting into it a little bit. So that is another factor. Ossoff obviously has a clear field. Republicans aren't worried. They think everybody's going to come on board, especially if ultimately, Trump endorses, they will, the party will coalesce around whoever the nominee is. So there's not a lot of concern from Republicans there on that front. And they say they're happy with any of the 3 guys running. So,
yeah. So Ossoff, Collins, and then who's 3?
Cassidy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Cassidy,
and then Cornyn.
And then Cornyn.
Just pulling up the list here. Someone who's come onto the list because of a strong Democratic recruit is John Husted. Mm-hmm. He is the senator who was appointed earlier this year to fill J.D. Vance's term when he became vice president.
In Ohio.
And he is facing a familiar name to those of you who have listened to this podcast, Sherrod Brown, who just lost re-election to Ohio's other senator, Bernie Moreno, a year ago. So Brown is definitely a strong Democratic recruit. He, was a longtime senator. strong name ID.
Been in public service in Ohio since the dawn of
Yeah, like nobody doesn't know who Sherrod Brown is. So
speaking of checks, he can certainly bring in the checks. I mean,
yeah,
the guy is an amazing fundraiser. So I think we had sort of discussed that if Brown wasn't in the race on the Democratic side, this would definitely be on the bubble. It would probably not make our list, but Brown makes it somewhat competitive. Still, he'll need all that money. He'll need some luck, to really pull this off. But
he's going to have to make Republicans put resources into Ohio as well that they otherwise could be spending in a state like Georgia or some of these open races. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
North Carolina, is an open seat. So
yeah. So and then Ed Markey in Mass again, totally unlikely to flip. It happened once about 15 years ago, and the odds of that lightning striking again, I think the bedraggled Mass GOP would have a hard time making that happen. But he does face a primary challenge right now from Seth Moulton and perhaps Ayanna Pressley or. She may get in or we'll see, but that's an interesting race because it does upend a little bit this sort of progressive, older establishment versus younger progressive dynamic that's kind of taking hold in the Democratic Party. We saw last night, obviously, that in New York City, Markey is, has a pretty strong record as a progressive. Moulton, you could argue, is perhaps more of a centrist. So that's going to be fascinating to watch, even though it's unlikely to figure into the calculation of which party controls the Senate.
Yeah. Moulton's an interesting guy. Yeah. I mean, just he's bucked leadership a little bit, in particularly Nancy Pelosi's, return to the speakership in 2019. He was among a small number of kind of people who are like, maybe we should have somebody, people I like or people more, in my generation. And he's made that kind of explicit in announcing his challenge to Markey. I mean, he's a millennial, I believe. He's a millennial. Is that technically a millennial?
47. I can't remember.
I don't remember the exact years of the cutoff.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think he's either a geriatric millennial, which is my favorite term ever, or he's a young Gen X. Put it that way.
Yeah.
As a millennial who is not a geriatric millennial, I just feel like that is a term that could only be applied to the millennial generation. Like, you're a geriatric millennial.
Right.
My sister, as an older Gen Z, does not get that.
Right. How old is your sister?
27.
Okay. Oh wow, she's right.
And she's the youngest to two millennials, so she's definitely right on the bubble. But
yeah. So she's unemployed then? Is that?
My sister is gainfully employed, despite having graduated college in 2020.
Yeah, well, that is something, because that seems to be one of these, kind of huge factors, I think, in politics right now.
Yeah.
The Gen Z, turned a little bit rightward.
Yeah.
Because the economy for them stinks.
Right.
They're getting out of college with massive loads of debt. There aren't that many jobs. I used to be able to think that I can just get some crappy job at least.
Right. A starter job.
Yeah, there aren't even crappy jobs or Mick jobs, to use a term from the novel Gen X. There aren't even that many of those now. So congrats.
Shut up, Jill.
All right, let's talk the most problematic of our topics, which is the most vulnerable House incumbents. And just to set the stage, because we are, dear listeners, don't worry, going to talk about election results from last night more than just Maine ballot initiatives. But the part of the reason that we like to time this to elections, and there was really no way to conceivably do this with the time frame that we had, and wait for California and because it seemed like the redistricting rounds that have kicked off, they kicked off in Texas and have sort of steamrolled into Missouri and then North Carolina and Ohio and Indiana and Maryland and California. We had to pick a time frame. Because a lot of work goes into this. Again, my aforementioned phone calls and sit downs with campaign strategists. It's an enormous amount of work that the two of you put in to gauging where the strategists are, where the polling is, what the political dynamic is. I mean, and we had to get this. So, spoiler alert, California is not on this. That will change with the next round of our vulnerables. But let's talk about the people we know absolutely are vulnerable as incumbents, and then we can get a little bit to where California might go. But let's focus on the folks that we know have tough races ahead of them on the House Most Vulnerable Incumbents list.
I think with this list this time, there's sort of two categories of folks that we have on the list. There are folks who are vulnerable because they're from those swing districts we're always talking about, the ones that, are sort of the most 50-50, or there are crossover districts. There are a Republican who won in a Harris district or a Democrat who won in a district that Trump carried last year. And then there are the folks who are on this list because of redistricting, which, we mentioned earlier with Kansas and California, and has really made several districts that either were not vulnerable, newly vulnerable, or, really made the situation for some members even more difficult going into next year. The number one person on our list is no stranger to being on this list, Don Davis of North Carolina. He is a Democrat in his third term, represents an Eastern North Carolina district, and he is the only North Carolina Democrat that is in a district that Trump carried. He was number 10 last time we did this, sort of coming in, the dynamics of his district just being really tough and it being really early in the year and sort of not necessarily having a great sense of who has the momentum, where is the pulse. He was on at number 10. He's now number 1.
And again, North Carolina redistricted. This is like every couple of minutes or so. If they think of a new person that they can, slot, some Democrat in a city, they can slot into some district about 1,000 miles away, that only has trees in it or something.
No state in the nation likes to redistrict like North Carolina likes to redistrict. What's interesting about his district, like I said, it was always going to be vulnerable, but they've brought in some more Republican-leaning areas, and sort of when you look at the areas that have been taken out of the first district and the areas that have been putting in, he's lost a population of Black voters and gotten a new population of white voters that are Republican-leaning. And so these dynamics really are making his reelection look impossible. Democrats are not writing him off by any means. But, I do think that he's now in, I want to say, the tilt Republican category as a Democrat. So, he's got some steps to overcome here. Will also caveat, we go on, he's running for reelection in his district until he says otherwise. But there is sort of a question mark of whether or not he could run in the third district against Republican Greg Murphy. So we'll sort of see what he has to say about his election plans, coming forward. But he's number 1. And then in number 2 is Vicente Gonzalez, which I'll let Daniela talk about. But this is another case of redistricting sort of pushing someone up the map.
Yeah.
Up the list, excuse me.
I think Republicans would assert, yes, redistricting will give him a big boost, but that district was already shifting towards Republicans, or I should say towards President Trump. He made huge gains there.
He's no stranger. Gonzalez is no stranger to these kind of races.
Yeah. No. And he's a survivor, which is why no one should ever count him out. Another factor, the question of the Latino vote, and again, moving towards Trump last time around, Republicans are kind of counting on that as being a durable gain that will transcend Trump and help, some random congressional candidate, and B, that those voters, are now have sort of permanently shifted to the right. And I think that's an open question, particularly after last night and what we saw in, various parts of the country. New Jersey, obviously there were no elections in Texas. There were elections in Texas, but there was only a special election for a congressional race in Texas. But those are big questions, as to sort of are those voters really Republicans, or were they sending a message? Were they angry at the Democrats? Were they motivated by economic issues? Have they shifted? Some of the polling, even, prior to last night, seemed to suggest that these voters are not to be counted on by Republicans. So I think what happens in that district and a couple of others in South Texas in particular, Latino majority districts, especially with large working class Latino populations, is going to be really one of the stories we'll be watching next
Yeah, I think that point cannot be overstated. That in general, I've always been sort of, I'm impressed with the alacrity with which these maps can be designed to maximize, the advantages of Republicans or Democrats. But I also on a very broad sense, you're only taking the voters from the last election. like and so we have a fairly dynamic country, and it's changing. We had a pretty steady immigration rate until the last couple of years, and particularly this year it has slowed to a trickle. There's internal migration. People die. People get eligible to vote. And this all changes. And I've always cautioned people, being from Arizona, that just because people are moving from California to Arizona, that doesn't mean it's just a bunch of hippies, that wanted to vote for Ralph Nader or something like that, like the sort of stereotypical California thing. That could mean any number of things. And what it really meant was that a lot of folks, working class folks, Republican leaning folks, were part of that migration from California into Arizona and to Texas. And the main thing was they just needed a cheaper place to live. That's the thing that gets lost in this, I think. And then to your point again, Daniela, about Latinos in South Texas, our own columnist David Winston has frequently challenged his Republican colleagues and clients and so forth to not think of Latinos as people who are here, they're Democrats and now they're Republicans, is that they are the quintessential independent voters. And for years, that trend was going the Democrats' way, and then it started going the Republicans' way. But we don't know what the effect on is. What the polling, a lot of the polling that we see now is that independents in particular are not happy with the world right now, and particularly this administration. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to derail there, but
those are all good. Those are all really key points to remember. So much of politics is reacting to what happened last time without really looking at what's going to happen this time. And of course, nobody knows, but there are signs there. So I think, Republican assumptions that these voters are now in their camp and will be for a generation are, definitely not borne out yet.
I think we can talk about the next couple sort of in a crew. We've got 3 Republicans, Gabe Evans of Colorado, Ryan McKenzie of Pennsylvania, Mariannette Miller Meeks of Iowa. Honestly, we can sort of talk about the next 4. Democrat Jared Golden of Maine, and these are sort of all members in quintessential swing districts, either crossover districts or very narrow margins. Narrowly won their elections last year. And it's just kind of, frankly, we're starting to see from last night some polling that sort of came out in just the last couple of days, a better pulse of where things sort of are as a nation and how people are seeing this. But we still have pretty limited information in terms of polling. We don't have polling on a lot of these districts individually yet. So we do have to kind of look at past performance. They're all in these groups. And I think we'll see, I think how Republicans, for these 3 Republicans, Gabe Evans, Ryan McKenzie, Mariannette Miller Meeks, sort of how they can message on the big, beautiful bill that Republicans passed this year, I think is going to be really interesting to sort of see what they take, how they sort of talk about. I think we're hearing from a lot of Republicans, when people file their taxes next year, they're going to see big tax returns, and it's going to be, they're going to be really excited about this.
They'll also see that the hospital down the street is closed.
Right, which is something that I think Jared Golden in Maine is really, really emphasized on. And
the grocery bill is 4 times as expensive because of tariffs.
Right. So we'll see, but they're all going to have some tough races. Both parties of those 4 feel good about where they're at, I would say. And Gabe Evans and Ryan McKenzie are freshmen. The freshman reelection is kind of generally considered to be the hardest. The other 2 are more proven winners, even in tough districts. So they're certainly going to have fights. There are some potential new dynamics in Maine, especially with former Governor Paul LePage is looking likely to be Jared Golden's opponent. And for the first time since his first election in 2018, he faces a primary opponent. So that's something that National Democrats are not necessarily super pleased with, but he'll have to contend with. And even though, people sort of feel pretty good about where he's at. It's something that he'll have to put resources into. And
It's
all
almost
that.
like Golden, like, isn't even so much like a swing district as like it's a Republican, it's a Trump
It's a
district.
Trump district. I mean,
And,
Trump.
and he also beat like a NASCAR driver.
Yeah.
Last time, so.
Trump carried the district by 9 points last year, and Golden carried it by 0.7.
Yeah.
So, at some point there is
Like
a
Gonzalez,
question.
a survivor.
Yes, a survivor, and a question of like how far this sort of looks at the next person on the list as well. Actually, like how far can a Democrat outrun a Republican district? And that is where our next person on the list, a new entrant, very recently, as of last Friday, when Ohio got new congressional lines for next year, a little bit more quickly than I think many people observing this process had expected, is Marcy Kaptur.
They had like delayed. They had been ordered to redraw it for like 100 years, and then all of a sudden it's like they just gavelled it and said like, let's just like kind of make it a little more Republican in each one of these, and let's just like go.
They struck a deal. I think it seems that there was some concerns about if this redistricting commission didn't strike a deal, would this then be subject to a ballot referendum, which could potentially delay new lines even further? And then also, I mean, one person we haven't talked about on this list is Emanuel Cleaver from Missouri. He's not on the list because Missouri is going through a ballot referendum process for their new map, and it's really uncertain how that's going to play out. We wanted to sort of wait and see before we put him either at the very top or near the very top of this list. And I think some people are like, oh, could this have happened in Ohio, and were Republicans motivated to make a deal? So, I think there was some concern that Republicans maybe weren't going to be thrilled that they did this, because Amelia Sykes, another Democrat, is now looking stronger than she would have maybe under a Republican-only drawn map. But Democrats, generally are, I think, pleasantly surprised that this worked out the way it did.
And again, when I think about Ohio, within, or at least within my memory, I guess, which, who knows, like, take it as you will. But Ohio used to be the swing state.
Yeah.
It was
not that long ago.
Yeah, the calculus was,
The bellwether.
if you wanted to win the presidency, you had to win Ohio and Pennsylvania and Florida.
Yeah.
I mean, those were the biggies, right? And that's kind of shifted, to be more like they're away from that. Pennsylvania is still, absolutely essential. But like Ohio was like written off for some reason, like, within, the last few years, even though, it historically had been a little more swingy, and people like Sherrod Brown had demonstrated that you could win there. And like Florida, Florida was close until it wasn't close. Yeah. And, again, this shows that things can swing back and forth depending on, what people's, like lives are like. Regardless of where Ohio may be going or where it's been, Marcy Kaptur is on this list, though.
Talk about it. We were talking about survivors. Talk about a survivor, the longest serving woman in the House. Look, she's on the list. This is going to be a tough district. I think Trump would have carried this new district by 10.6 points. At some point, there's only so many swing people who are going to split their ballots in this day and age. So I think Democrats feel like, we'll see. It's going to be tough, but if anybody can do it in Ohio, especially, it's going to be her. And Republicans are going to have to figure out who their candidate here is. Derek Marin, who ran against Kaptur last year, is running again. There's a few other candidates in the race as well that Republicans, are certainly open to. We'll see who else comes in. So far, this is a district that came off the map in 2022, I think, when J.R. Majewski, who was a pretty flawed Republican candidate, was the nominee against her. I think that's probably the biggest in a lot of these races. But in this one, it's like, okay, you don't necessarily want to end up with a flawed nominee in a district like this that really should be a really top pickup opportunity for the Republicans.
Right. And she's actually survived not only those kind of challenges, but also an inter-party challenge back in 2012 when Ohio lost a seat in the northern part, and so they combined Dennis Kucinich and Marcy Kaptur's districts. And again, she probably had the advantage,
Mhm.
because it was a little bit more of Toledo and that area where she's from than Cleveland, where Kucinich, was primarily based. But Kucinich also had a national profile,
Right.
in a way that she did not, and she beat him like not, and it wasn't super close at the end. So anyway,
I think not having a national profile is a big check in her favor. She's was talking to a political science professor recently from up there, and she's been to, hundreds of ribbon cuttings, and everybody
Mhm.
knows her. She's not in DC hitting the party circuit. She's in the
Right.
district and of the district. So that's
She's eating at Tony Pacos,
yeah, exactly. Big check in her favor, I think.
Right. All right.
So our last three, we've got Mike Lawler, no stranger to these lists.
Perennial
Um,
occupant of the
came off
honorable-
came off towards the end of the 24 cycle and then came back on. He's one of three Republicans in a Harris 1 district. Don Bacon, really no stranger to these lists, has announced he's retiring. And Brian
Sorry, you said
Fitzpatrick.
Don Bacon. Yeah. Oh, Don Bacon. Yes. Sorry. I had Don Davis on the brain. Sorry.
No, you're
There you
good.
go.
I was like, I'm pretty confident.
Too many Don. Yes, Don Bacon is off the
Don
list.
Bacon
yes.
is off the
Yeah,
list because he's retiring.
He's had enough. Yeah.
He's decided he no longer wants to be on the roll call most vulnerable list, so he's retiring. That is not the real reason, I don't think. And Brian Fitzpatrick, who's got a quite proven electoral record in Bucks County, is the third Republican in a Harris 1 district. I think Republicans Republicans feel great about Lawler. He is, somebody who's always on TV. He's a great fundraiser. He's, I think for as much as he's on TV, it seems like he's in the district as well. They really see him moving in a Brian Fitzpatrick way. And I think this kind of first midterm election as an incumbent with his party in power will be a big test for whether or not that happens. Democrats have a pretty crowded primary here with sort of two candidates who have emerged as probably the strongest potential contenders to go against him. Kate Connolly, an Army veteran, Beth Davidson, a Rockland County legislator. We'll see how that primary plays out. I think right now there are, I want to say 8 Democrats in that primary. We'll see if all of them actually end up running. With that many, obviously you could really split the vote in a lot of different ways. But we'll see what happens here. I think Lawler is definitely a top target of Democrats. He's really out there willing to spar with, track down Hakeem Jeffries in the Capitol and spar with him in front of the cameras. This is somebody that I think they're really going to try to throw their all at, especially, like I said, last year, his district came off the map. He was running against Mondaire Jones, who maybe wasn't the strongest Democratic candidate in this district. He had, been elected in the area and then ended up moving to a New York City district that was much more progressive, didn't win a primary there, moved back. Just the Republicans had a lot of hits they could use against him, videos of things that he'd been, saying, a voting record from when he was previously in Congress. So I think against, these potential new Democratic opponents, we'll see how this race plays out. But he's still going to be in a competitive race.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I have an affinity for, this Hudson Valley, kind of political calculus, because I feel like it is, yes, it's Democratic, but it's also like it was historically Republican for a long time, but it was also where like Franklin Roosevelt was from. So it's just like, it's a weird, it's a weird place, that can turn on a dime on an incumbent if they feel that they're not representing. It is a highly engaged electorate.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about California, because again, no California members, because we didn't know. I mean,
Yeah.
we saw where it was going. The Prop 50, which would redraw the maps in California to heavily favor Democrats. As Gavin Newsom, the governor, said that this is a way to counteract what Donald Trump was demanding, and that the Texas legislature and governor did in Texas to redraw, it sort of make it more difficult for, up to 4 or 5, Democrats in Texas, including Gonzalez, who we mentioned earlier. That was last night was the earliest call I can remember for any California race ever.
Yes.
Before
Amazing.
they went to mail-in voting. It was like 11:01 or something like that. Like when the poll, like a minute after the polls closed. Or something.
I thought that CNN was going to do the thing when they're like, we have a key race alert, and then they say like, key race alert, this is too early to call. And so then when they actually called it, I was floored.
Right. Yeah. It was. Oh, I mean, overwhelming. Like is not an overstatement for that one. So this is sorting out. Right now we have a number of people like Kevin Kiley who we think would have been vulnerable regardless, and is probably way more vulnerable now. But like we just need to gather information. But to make the next call about who's going to be making the next most vulnerable list. But what were Daniela and Mel, what were your big takeaways from not just California but Abigail Spanberger won her race. Her race was called very quickly. She's a Democrat. She left Congress last year, but she was in that 2018 just money class of House Democrats, primarily like the big like heavy hitters from that class are people like Spanberger, who just won the governorship like easily last night, another easy quick call. Alyssa Slotkin, who won a Senate seat last year in Michigan and beat a former member, Mike Rogers, and was a former intelligence officer like Spanberger, and then Mikey Sherrill, whose bid for the governorship of New Jersey looked a little shaky for a while there. We saw some very tight polling towards the end. Again, it took a little longer, but she's going to end up winning by about anywhere from 6 to 8 points, over Jack Ciattarelli, I think his job is just running for governor in New Jersey, right? He has lost 3 straight elections as a governorship. I just want to tell you, Jack, there's other things you can do with life than run for governor.
There?
I mean, but a friend of mine from New Jersey sort of joked that he's becoming the William Jennings Bryan, of New Jersey, where he just keeps running. And if he couldn't win this time, it's a question of whether he can, I think. But what were your takeaways from this? Because we've got the familiarity with people like Sherrill, who will trigger another special election. Yay. And Spanberger and California.
I mean, it was a great night for Democrats. Democrats are feeling really good this morning. The biggest win for Republicans is a pretty strong Zohran Mamdani win in New York City, and their favorite new foil to be, tying Democrats of all political shades to in the next 12 months. But I think that you saw interesting campaigns actually from Mamdani, Spanberger, and Sherrill in the way that they all were really focused on affordability and the economy, sort of with different focuses within that. Sherrill was really focused on energy prices. Abigail Spanberger was really focused on federal workers and the layoffs that they've faced, as well as like housing affordability. And also Zohran really focused on freezing the rent, housing affordability, cost of groceries, cost of living.
City-run grocery stores.
Yes.
Yeah.
Free
So
buses.
that to me is sort of, I think, the biggest initial takeaway. I mentioned earlier Republicans' bill the reconciliation bill that they passed earlier this year. Can they sort of message that to say, this is what we've done, and show people that affordability is going down? So far, I mean, I think that it would seem that voters in these places have not found that the Trump administration and the Republicans have done a lot to lower their cost of living in the year that they have had so far. We'll see how that changes if they try to take additional steps once Congress gets out of the shutdown, sort of how that goes.
I mean,
if I'm optimistic someday. But I think that is sort of my biggest takeaway. And then how do Republicans respond to that? Like I said, they're really focused so far. All of their messaging since last night has been really anti-Zohran Mamdani. But, they did have arguably weaker candidates running in both Virginia and New Jersey, and these are both blue-leaning states. But the margins in both of these races are really quite shocking in terms of the size of their margins of victory.
Yeah, and Daniela, I was sort of struck, to Mel's point there that like these are places where Trump made inroads. Like he
Yeah.
made inroads in New York City,
Yeah.
and he endorsed Andrew Cuomo, who
Yes.
lost to Mamdani. He made inroad. I mean, he kept Harris to a 6-point victory in New Jersey, which is unheard of considering how Democratic it had been trending. And then even in Virginia, he'd been picking up support. And those gains for Republicans, I think your term was durable, durable win
Yeah.
or durable, sort of gain. It doesn't seem that they're that durable.
You have to wonder, Trump he's such a larger than life figure. He's such a big personality and a huge presence in politics. He has made all politics kind of about him. And that was great when he could lift up others when he was on the ballot. Presumably he'll never be on the ballot again. Who knows? But that appears to be the case. So how is the party going to, run without him there, without that big presence? It's like really kind of raises that question. I think Republicans also have, if you look at some of the issues they ran on, Governor Youngkin with the parents' rights movement stuff really wrung that out and found a lot of success on that. His lieutenant governor tried on trans rights. Certainly that was one of the centerpieces of her campaign, and it doesn't appear that resonated with voters at all. So perhaps some of those cultural issues are kind of going to recede into the background because voters don't seem as focused on them as they are on, sort of frontline economic issues that impact them directly.
Yep, every incumbent feels the heat when the economy stinks. So, and
Well, Biden sure did last time, right?
And if you control the White House, the House, the Senate, and a lot of the courts, there's people kind of scratch their head when you try to vote. When you try to blame the minority party.
Yeah.
And I mean, just that point on, Trump himself was posting on Truth Social last night that, Republicans lost because he wasn't on the ballot and because of the shutdown, and taking the shutdown out of it. I mean, he's not going to be on the ballot in 2026. He's got a 4-year term. So how, and this has been a question really since last year is how do Republicans keep up that Trump vote, those Trump voters who don't turn out for the midterms? How do they turn them out to support their candidates? It does not seem that they were maybe able to do that successfully last night. They're going to have to figure that out for the midterms in a lot of these races. If they want to hold the House, if they want to, the Senate is a bit more of an uphill climb for Democrats. But I would say they're probably feeling better about the Senate this morning than they were a week ago. So,
I've kept you guys way too long because I know you're putting some finishing touches on stuff for your roll call stories. But thank you so much for going through this. This is great, and there's just a lot. And this is the most complicated calculus for a most vulnerable I've been a part of since I started in 2011 at Roll Call. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And it's time for the word of the week. We're going to do something new with the word of the week, which from reader feedback is actually spell it out, because realize that not everybody is watching this on YouTube. So the word of the week is a weird one, and it comes from a book that I'm reading, which provided a previous word of the week in shitification. The word of this week is monopsony. 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 This came across from the Inshitification book by Cory Doctorow that I'm reading, and both chuckling and crying at the same time as I read this book. But this stuck out to me because of again of the economics of it. So monopsony in economics, a monopsony is a market structure in which a single buyer substantially controls the market as the major purchaser of goods and services. And if you look at the sort of growing control over groceries or tech or any number of things that make the economy go, you see us moving that there are sellers who are advantaged by this monopolist, but there are also buyers, monopsonists. So monopsony is the word of the week at Political Theater. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Thank you again, Mary Helen McIntire, Daniela Altimari, for all of your good work and for letting me take you out of that work for an hour. I apologize. This is
Lots to talk about today.
lots to talk about today, but thank you so much. And you can check out their stories on the most vulnerable incumbents in the House and Senate, as well as election results and everything else on rollcall.com. Thanks again for listening to Political Theater. We'll see you next time.